Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Welcome to our explainer on one of America's most baffling and forensically complex cases, the death of Kathleen Peterson. This is a story where the physical evidence seems to tell three totally different stories: a brutal murder, a tragic accident, or something else entirely. Okay, let's just dive right in because this is the paradox at the very heart of the case. You have a crime scene that is just drenched in blood, screaming brutal homicide. The autopsy finds 7 deep, nasty lacerations on the back of Kathleen's head. But, and this is the part that makes no sense, there are 0 skull fractures, not one. So how is that even possible? This single contradiction is the forensic knot that everyone has been trying to untangle for over 2 decades. So here's the timeline that no one really disputes. Michael and Kathleen are at home, they watch a movie, have some wine by the pool. He says she went inside around 1:55 in the morning. He claims he stayed outside for about another 45 minutes before he went in and found her. That 45-minute window, that is where this entire mystery lives. By 2:40 a.m., he's on the phone with 911, and just 6 minutes after that, he's calling back, frantic, saying she's stopped breathing. Now, the evidence that was collected both at the scene and during the autopsy, it only made things more confusing. It presented a set of facts that just seemed to completely contradict each other. Just think about this for a second. 7 distinct, deep gashes on the back of her head. I mean, for the investigators who first walked in, this immediately looked like a violent, bloody assault, right? A simple fall down the stairs just doesn't usually create 7 separate impact wounds. But here is the massive problem with that theory. For all that incredible damage to her scalp, there were 0 skull fractures, no internal bleeding, no bruising on the brain itself. Forensic experts were floored by this. They said it's basically unheard of. So the question becomes, how could someone possibly be beaten with enough force to cause 7 deep wounds without a single fracture to the bone underneath? This is the paradox the prosecution had to somehow explain. And that paradox led the prosecution to build their entire case around a really specific story. They needed a motive, and more importantly, they needed a unique murder weapon that could explain how you could get all of that cutting without any of the crushing. So the state argued that a perfect storm of motives led Michael Peterson to kill his wife. First, money. They were in over $140,000 of debt, and there was a life insurance policy for $1.4 million. Then they found thousands of emails between Michael and a male escort. The theory was Kathleen found out about his secret life, a huge fight broke out, and it turned deadly. Their proposed weapon? A hollow fireplace tool called a blowpoke, which they argued was light enough to slice open the scalp, but not heavy enough to fracture the skull. But then, in a wild turn of events, the prosecution's central theory about this murder weapon completely collapsed, right in the middle of the trial. The defense team found the missing blowpoke sitting in the family's garage. And get this, it was covered in undisturbed cobwebs and grime, proving it hadn't been moved in a very long time. Forensics tested it. No blood, no hair, no DNA, nothing. The weapon that was at the very heart of the state's case, well, it wasn't the weapon. So, with the murder weapon theory in absolute tatters, the defense came back with a much simpler, though still pretty problematic explanation. This was all just a tragic, horrifying accident. The defense argued that Kathleen, who had been drinking and had taken Valium, slipped on those narrow, poorly lit stairs. They proposed this complex double fall scenario. Okay, so she falls once, she hits her head, she's dazed. Then she tries to get up in a pool of her own blood, slips again, and falls a second time, which would explain the additional injuries. But this theory had its own big problem. Sure, it explained the lack of a skull fracture, but many experts just found it really hard to believe that even 2 separate falls could produce 7 distinct wounds like the one she had. And the sheer volume of blood, it just seemed to point to something far more violent and prolonged than a simple fall. So, with the murder theory missing a weapon, and the fall theory really stretching the limits of belief, a new and at first almost unbelievable theory started to emerge. It was a theory that didn't involve a human attacker at all. This third theory suggests that Kathleen was attacked outside her home by a large barred owl. Injured and disoriented, she then managed to stumble inside, where she collapsed and bled out at the bottom of the staircase. I know it sounds crazy, but stick with me. Because suddenly, all of these weird pieces of evidence that didn't fit anywhere else started to make perfect sense. A microscopic owl feather was found tangled in hair that Kathleen had literally pulled from her own scalp. The wounds had a kind of trident shape, perfectly matching the talons of an owl. Pine needles and a wood splinter were found in her hair, which puts the initial struggle outdoors. Drops of her blood were found on the front walk, and, most importantly, an owl's talons are razor sharp. They would cause deep lacerations without the blunt force needed to fracture a skull. It solves this central paradox. So when you actually lay all the evidence out side by side, a really clear pattern emerges. The murder theory, it fails on the skull fracture and the outdoor evidence. The fall theory, it can't explain the feathers, the pine needles, or the blood outside. But the owl theory, as bizarre as it sounds, is the only one that provides a scientifically consistent explanation for every single piece of forensic evidence found. So that begs a huge question, right? If the evidence pointed so strongly in this other, strange direction, how on earth was Michael Peterson convicted of murder in the first place? Well, the answer to that reveals a pretty serious failure within the justice system itself. You see, the whole foundation of the prosecution's forensic case was built on the testimony of a so-called bloodstain pattern analyst named Dwayne Daver. Years later, an independent audit blew the lid off his work. It revealed that Daver had systematically misrepresented evidence in dozens of cases. He lied on the stand about his expertise. He withheld evidence that would have helped the defense. His science was junk, and the conviction it helped secure was, eventually, thrown out. So, after years of legal battles, facing the uncertainty of a brand new trial, Michael Peterson decided to end it. In 2017, he entered what's known as an Alford plea. It's a really strange legal move where you don't actually admit you're guilty, but you do acknowledge that the prosecution has enough evidence that they'd probably convict you again. It's a guilty plea without admitting guilt. He was sentenced to time already served, 89 months, and he was released. So today, Michael Peterson is legally a convicted felon for the death of his wife. And yet, he's a free man who has always maintained his innocence. The legal chapter is closed, but the forensic truth of what really happened to Kathleen Peterson remains a deeply unsettling mystery. And at the end of the day, that leaves us with this fundamental question. The Peterson case forces us to confront this conflict between a simple, easy-to-believe story of domestic violence and a complex, bizarre, but scientifically consistent truth. It makes you ask, when an outlandish explanation actually fits all the facts, should we be brave enough to believe it?